Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hyperspace on the Dark Matter Digital Network. I'm your host, Solaris BlueRaven. I want to thank everybody for tuning in this evening, and a special thank you to webmaster and producer Keith Rowland. And my special guest this evening is Robert Sullivan IV. And Robert W. Sullivan IV is a philosopher, historian, antiquarian, jurist, theologian, radio TV personality, writer, lawyer, and the best-selling author of the books The Royal Arch of Enoch, The Impact of Masonic Ritual, Philosophy and Symbolism, 2012, and Cinema Symbolism, A Guide to Esoteric Imagery in Popular Movies, 2014. That's just very recent. He is currently writing Cinema Symbolism 2, more esoteric imagery from popular movies, as well as his first work of fiction, A Pact with the Devil, the story of the Elizabeth Burnblack, and her involvement with the occult, black magic, and the dark arts. Sullivan is also working on another book on Masonry titled Freemasonry and the Path to Babylon. Mr. Sullivan is a Freemason, having joined Amicable-St. Boy, I'm having a hard time tonight. St. John's Lodge 25, Baltimore, Maryland in 1997. He became a 32nd degree Master of the Royal Secret Scottish Rite Mason in 1999. Valley of Baltimore, Orient of Maryland, and a lifelong Marylander. He resides in Baltimore. And it's with great pleasure we welcome Robert to the show this evening. His website is robertwsullivan4th.com. Welcome, Robert.
Hello, Solaris. Thank you for having me on. That was a very lightning fast intro, if I do say so myself.
Lightning fast with a little glitch here and there, but yeah, we're good. It's great to have you back on. So welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me on. It's great to be back on Hyperspace. Much appreciated. And I think in all my days of being on radio now, I think it was the fastest intro I ever heard. So thank you. And again, it's just wonderful to be here with you tonight on Hyperspace. Again, thank you for having me on.
My pleasure. It's always an honor to have you on. So let's dive into what you've been up to for the past few months, and also let's touch base with your recent projects and books.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm still out there doing shows on Cinema Symbolism, which I know you want to talk to me about tonight. This is the second book I wrote. This came out a little over a year ago. I can't believe that, and I can't believe it was just last week was the 3-year anniversary of Royal Arch of Enoch. It's Tempus Fugit. Where does time go?
Right.
Time flies, but. I've been just doing a lot of radio shows promoting both books still, probably concentrating on Cinema Symbolism more than anything because it's the more recent book. And just, in my spare time and in my time working on, I'm actually writing 3 books at once, but I've put the next book on Masonry, the Path to Babylon book, which you mentioned. That's somewhat on the back burner right now. I'm writing my first work of fiction, which you mentioned, and Cinema Symbolism 2, the sequel to Cinema Symbolism, the one that's out right now. I'm going to do a whole new slate of movies in that one. Some very interesting symbology going on in some movies that you may not expect it. And I've been just working on those. I'm real happy with the way they're coming out. Writing, editing, going back through them, making sure everything's the way I like it, and making sure that, this reads right, or I didn't, I put something in that, makes sense, and make sure the proper footnotes in. It's not only writing, it's editing. Editing's a huge part of this as well. And, and as we were talking about off break, really just for time constraints, I'm limiting myself right now to one show a week. And it's great to be with you tonight again. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. And when I look at your background, because it's so extensive in Masonic teachings and of course, at your level of initiation, you look at the symbolism of movies. I like the way you're breaking this down, because for regular people who are not involved in these paths of mysticism, they wouldn't see what you're seeing. So I'm really pleased that you're actually putting books out on this subject. And of course, I do want to get into the symbolism behind everything in your books and the symbolism. And also, do you think that this is, what kind of symbolism, first of all, are we talking about? And is this a trigger to the subconscious viewer, a message to perhaps an initiate, or is it a ritual during the film? I'd like your perception of what you think's going on.
Well, it can be. The truth of the matter is, it can be all that, and it can be limited to a couple things. I mean, it can be that it can be, tapping into the subconscious mind. It can be more overt. You deal with concepts related to the collective unconscious, the archetypes. These are, Carl Gustav Jung talked about this. This comes from the world of Plato. Some of this delves into the world of the tarot cards, the father, the hermit, the mother, the lovers, things like that. These characters, these tarot embodiments, these archetypes turn up in film routinely. The solar hero, the lunar heroine, things of this nature. What is critical for me with doing this book, I guess, is a lot of times is the context of the movie itself. Am I dealing with, archetypes? Am I dealing with a hidden alchemical theme? Am I dealing with a solar theme? Am I dealing with a ritual? I take the first National Treasure movie. This is something I dissected in the Royal Arch of Enoch book. The first National Treasure movie is actually a Masonic ritual, literally. It's the Royal Arch of Enoch ceremonial. It's the recovery of the treasure vault, the Masonic treasure vault, in an underground vault beneath the holy ground. So you can be dealing with Masonic, rituals in films. And just to call it symbolism in general, numerology, astrology, numbers play a big part of this. If you're dealing with a lot of times with movies that deal with evil themes, usually diabolical evil themes, you will have a play with the filmmakers will play with the weather, tinker with the weather outside. That's a common theme. So it was just really, when I was doing this, it was just trying to, understand the context of the movie and what was being presented to me. And that was really critical, Solaris, for the breakdown of the interpretation of the movie, was just the context of what was being shown to me. And it can be multi-layered. There can be more than one of these themes going on inside a movie, and it can be difficult to pick up on, believe me.
Right. And how often is this showing up? I mean, insofar as the movies, we have obviously a ton of movies that come out each year, but how often do you see this type of thing happening in the film industry?
It would be really hard for me to put a percentage on it. I mean, I know some of probably the more popular movies seem to have it. There are movies out there that I like that are devoid of this material or are devoid of this. It doesn't necessarily make them a bad movie. I couldn't really give you a percentage of what movies have it or don't. The only way I can really answer that is I can tell you that in doing this, there are movies that I thought were going to have, we're going to incorporate some of this stuff and really were devoid of it. Alternatively, there were movies that I saw that I thought were going to be just, banal, nothing to it, and they were overloaded with it. And it was, incredible to me, in some instances, the extent that these filmmakers went to conceal this stuff. And it really is. It's a trigger to the subconscious mind. And it's, to me also, I think it's a form of like a challenge. It's like playing chess. I've said on other shows, it's like playing, when I watch some of these movies by these guys, it's like I'm playing a symbolic game of chess against Bobby Fischer, to see what I can pick up on and, what they've concealed in their movies. It's just a fascinating study.
It really is. And when you think about it, I know a lot of people are paranoid about Masons in general. We had this kind of, we touched on this off air, but literally there's this perception that they're dark and insidious, and there's always this Illuminati thing hovering around. But really, I think it's about consciousness, higher consciousness, and how to handle energy and consciousness and transmute it. And even if you're seeing it on a film, I mean, I would suspect it's kind of not really malicious intent. It's probably just a neutral space of energy, and yet how people interpret it is their own personal space insofar as where they're at spiritually.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. I don't necessarily view it. I think some of this material, this esoterica, turning up in film is very sublime. I mean, it's very mythological. It delves into ancient mythology, ancient religions, Gnosticism, symbolism. I don't necessarily see a sinister agenda behind it. But I do in most cases believe that it is intentionally placed. And I really, the best way for me to describe this is, and it ties into Masonry to an extent, it's sort of like sacred geometry is really the best way for me to kind of explain it. And I get into this in Royal Arch of Enoch, and I touch on it also in cinema symbolism. It's if you're building a building and you're incorporating things like, the Vesica Pisces or the golden ratio, these divine proportions and mathematical formulas, you're investing the building, with this divine presence. People see it as negative or evil. That's not the intention. My only conclusion on this is that they view it negatively because there's no transparency. But it's the same sort of thing with the films. A lot of this material that's being used, I don't think it's evil or mind controlling or anything. I think it's like you said, it's a higher level for an initiator, someone there who is familiar with this can see it. But if you're not, it definitely will tap into your subconscious mind. I mean, you look at some of the big Hollywood blockbusters. It's all but the same story. I mean, it's the same theme repeating itself. It's different characters and different names and things like that. But you'll find some of these themes, going on in very different movies, but they're really similar. So no, I don't really see it as evil. I mean, I know there is a huge internet and YouTube subculture out there that, every time you see an eye in a triangle in a movie, this is Illuminati mind control. I really don't go down that path with either book. I try to explain it rationally, and from more of a, of a higher conscious standpoint.
I agree. Well, I think mysticism can be hijacked. That's the bottom line, and I think I've seen that in the past with covert technology. And that's a different animal altogether, but I agree with you. I think it's hidden in plain sight, and it's for people to digest according to their evolution to some degree. But you also have to do the homework, which is what you touched on as well. I have a background in the craft, and obviously, we touched on that too, how people have a misperception of the craft and the witches in general. I mean, the whole world, the word is taboo, but seriously, they don't really understand. And I think because they have not dove in or actually dive into these areas where they need to accelerate in understanding the mystery school teachings, they would probably benefit if they would just kind of look in and actually participate to the highest level, and then they would see it from a multidimensional design work instead of where they're looking at it from, which is usually linear.
No, I would tend to agree with that. I mean, I think that Masonry, has been maligned. But I think a lot of it. I mean, some of the stuff that comes out of this conspiracy world. I mean, just so painfully ill-informed. I've heard stuff that just for example, I've heard just straight falsehoods on this stuff. I've heard some of these guys say, Albert Pike is the inventor of the Scottish Rite. I mean, that's totally false. The Scottish Rite was invented in 1801 by Frederick Doucho. Pike wasn't even born yet. So I mean, you get into a lot of misinformation and bad interpretations, and of course Masonry meets in secret, and there's again limited transparency. But if you really do the research, and just point this out to the listeners. My first book, The Royal Arch of Enoch, was a product of 20 years of research into esoteric Freemasonry, symbolism, and really when I got done that book, I really turned the 20 years of research onto Hollywood. But what I discovered was when I was doing Royal Arches with Masonry, I mean, you don't even really get this in the Blue Lodge, even in the higher degrees, is this sort of vast Masonic history and how Masonry really influenced a lot of things going on in society, especially in the United States. In Royal Arch, I have a chapter in there called the United States of Freemasonry. And what you will actually find is, there was, to an extent in the early days of this country, this sort of Masonic conspiracy that did, work behind the scenes of government. I mean, this is kind of irrefutable. You get into people like DeWitt Clinton, who are using Masonry as this vehicle, especially the high degree bodies, to formulate policy over state lines. So, there is some truth to this. The difference is these guys saw it as positive. These guys saw it as, hey, we're a young country, we got to come together here. And if Masonry is going to serve as a conduit to put our political differences aside to work for the betterment of the country and society, hey, let's do it. But of course, there was this huge backlash. People didn't like it because there was no transparency. And it's really this anti-Masonic furor that really, to be honest, Solaris has really survived. All the way up into 2015, and it doesn't go away. I mean, I to this day, I've done shows where people, I'll get a message in the text room, or the chat room, hey, you're a lawyer, is there a wink, or a hand gesture you could do with the judge, that'll get your case dismissed or something, and you tell them no, there isn't, but they don't want to believe it.
Mm-hmm, right. And one thing I am aware of, and I do understand, and now I've learned to respect over the years, is that when you get to a certain level of consciousness and spirituality, and especially with mystery school teachings, some of that data you just can't relay to the public because, first of all, they won't understand it. They'll be afraid of it, and they might misrepresent it or misuse it, just like anything else. And I think there's something to be said about keeping things hidden or keeping things protected and shielded from those who would do contort or twist something that's extremely sacred and powerful.
I think there's some truth to that, and I think with Masonry, what it really, and this is again was sort of part of my motivation was to write the Royal Arch book, was to kind of, there was this real, paradox going on when I joined Masonry in the late 1990s. Of course, this was pre-internet. There was internet, but it was in its infancy. But you really had this polarizing. Belief system. I agree with you. It's one of the things with Masonry is they will present you with the information, but you've got to research it. It's up. They will give it. It's like a baby step. They will introduce you to it, but then it's up to you. It's up to you, the individual Mason, to either take it further or walk away from it, and it's your choice. And you won't be frowned upon either way. I chose to continue to research it. And when you start delving into these Masonic rituals and the hidden symbolisms, this treasure trove will be open to you of esoteric wisdom. And it's sort of the thing is if you take the time, it's available to the person that will take the time to research it. Is really, and I think if you take the time to research it, you will come to understand it and you won't abuse it. And at least I think that's what Masonry. I'm sure that that's my take on what Masonry is trying to teach. I guess to an extent it's a subjective. It's somewhat subjective. But just real quick, when I was joining Masonry in the late 1990s, there was sort of this really polar split going on. It doesn't really exist today anymore. Between, there was the conspiracy world where everything within Masonry was evil, but then even within Masonry, you had, any talk of esoteric or the occult or mystery schools or mysticism. It was just no, we don't have anything to do with that. We're just a charity organization and does bingo nights and that's it. But of course, that's really not the case. I mean, when you join Masonry, you will see it that way. But if you really take the time to investigate the rituals and the symbolism, I mean, you really will understand it. Sort of is a modern day mystery school. But just the wisdom is given to you, but it's up to the individual candidate to explore it and find out these higher truths and consciousness for themselves.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with you on that one. One thing I did want to ask you about, and this may be kind of off the wall, I don't know, but insofar as levels go, levels of initiation, obviously you're a 32nd degree Mason. Now, when you get up to 33, it seems to me like first of all they have to, I guess, select you, or is that something that they kind of pick you out of the group for that level?
Right. In order to reach if you go through if you join a Masonic lodge. Just your local this was called the Blue Lodge. It's degrees 1, 2, and 3. After you complete the third degree, you could go into 2 high degree bodies, the York Rite or the Scottish Rite. You can do both or neither. If you do the Scottish Rite like I do, you can do degrees 4 through 32. That's where it ends. Is at the 32nd. The 33rd degree is honorary, and you have to be invited to it. You cannot solicit the 33rd degree. And it's totally, they bestow it on who they want to for various reasons. It's completely, you can't solicit it. So I'm at the 32nd. That's as high as you can go in the Scottish Rite system. And it's the 33rd. It's offered to you or it isn't offered to you. That's really all there is to it.
Okay. And also, insofar as the level of initiation goes, does it have any correlation with dimensions? In other words, 32nd dimension, 33 dimension, anything connected with that? And my question being, as a 33rd degree, if they do get selected into that, would that be meaning or representation of them going into, say, a cloaked stance in the mystery school teachings where the information is invisible and it's, I want to say, underground to some degree? Does that resonate with you at all? And maybe you can't answer that.
It does. It does, but I would say I wouldn't necessarily say it has something to do with what you're saying, because what a lot of people aren't aware of, believe it or not, is the Scottish Rite system and the York Rite to an extent as well. It's a continuation of it's more of a continuation of the ritual story. From the Blue Lodge. It's really a continuation of these stories. People may not really be aware of this, but to be honest, and this may sound confusing. Really, the highest degree in Masonry, in the high degree systems, is the Royal Arch of Enoch ceremonial. It's the 13th degree in the Scottish Rite, and it's the 7th degree in the York Rite. The rituals in the Scottish Rite and the York Rite, in some instances, are out of order. So the rituals in some of the parts of the Scottish Rite later on actually take place prior to the Royal Arch ceremonial. Same thing within the York Rite. There's a bridge degree in the York Rite between the Royal Arch and the Knights Templar called the Red Cross of Babylon, which actually, ties into the next book I'm writing, which actually takes place prior to the Royal Arch of Enoch ceremonial. That is really the highest degree in Freemasonry. That's the end of the story. It's the 13th in the Scottish Rite, and it's the 7th in the York Rite. And that's really the end of the Masonic ritual. Some of the degrees in the Scottish Rite that actually come after that take place beforehand. Same with the York Rite. So when bear in mind that these rituals are sometimes out of order. So really, when you're dealing with Masonry and the high degree body, you really, what I would say to the listeners, really pay attention to that 13th and 7th degree, the Royal Arch of Enoch. That's the end of the story. That's the highest degree, really, in high degree body Freemasonry.
Well, that's really fascinating. I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but in some mystery school teachings, they associate the 13th dimension as hell. Have you heard of that or no?
No, but
Okay.
you will find this number 13 turning up all over the place.
Correct. Yeah.
You have, for example, you have you have 13. You have the 12 houses of the zodiac ruled by the sun. So we have a solar allegory with this, and an astrological allegory. We have in this 13th degree, we have the recovery of the name of God, which is the restoration of all wisdom. So we have 13. Of course, we have a reference right then to this 13th hidden sign of the zodiac, known as a fucus. You have also this very interesting parallel going on with Dante's Inferno, believe it or not, where in the Royal Arch ceremonial, the sacred name of God is concealed in the subterranean vault under 9 arches or 9 archways. And of course, this is paralleling Dante's Inferno, where the bottom of hell is 9 rings, which is where Lucifer is, or the devil. And this gets into this whole idea. This opens this whole can of worms, and even Albert Pike talks about this, and I talk about it in both my books, of this whole idea of Dante's Divine Comedy being Gnostic and reversed, where hell and Inferno is actually paradise, and paradise is actually Inferno. And the idea is when Dante and Virgil go down to the 9th ring of hell, this is where Satan is, but he actually leaves it by going up Satan to receive light, to receive gnosis. So and then you find this in this Royal Arch ceremonial, where you have this sacred wisdom concealed under 9 arches, and it's really kind of reflecting this Dante's Inferno thing. This is something I'm delving into in my next Masonic book, much more in depth.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you will find these very interesting symbolic parallels going on with the number 13, the number 7. This is the 7th degree in the York Rite. You'll find some interesting symbology going on with that as well when you get into architecture as well, especially with the Statue of Liberty.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a real deep study, but really pay attention to that Royal Arch ceremonial. That's really the premier portion of the high degrees.
Right, that makes perfect sense. And what do the rings represent, if I can ask?
The rings?
Yeah, the 9 rings.
No, that's in Inferno. Each ring, each circle of hell is a punishment, and the lower you go, the more extreme the punishment is. When Dante and Virgil go to Inferno, the first place they go is this thing called the Elysian Fields, which is basically where the virtuous pagans hang out. These were people who were born prior to Christ who didn't do anything, but since they weren't alive when Christ was born, they couldn't be born again. So they just kind of hang around and just do nothing. But then you get into the whole, the rings. You get the gluttony ring, the lust ring. Some of them escape me. But as the lower you go, it gets more severe, and the punishments gets more severe. And the lowest ring is the traitors, the backstabbers, and that's as low as you could go, and that's insane. And the worst is the traitors to the church and state, which is Judas Iscariot, Brutus, and Cassius, the two, Judas who killed Jesus, the traitor of Jesus, and Brutus and Cassius who killed Julius Caesar. They're actually being chewed for eternity in the mouth of Satan. So you have the traitors in the frozen part of hell, which is the lowest ring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for answering that. It's very fascinating to me. All this information is very interesting. Now, with Masonic teaching, do they actually really even believe in devils or hell or anything associated? Isn't it more about consciousness and mastering consciousness?
In order to join, I would say it's really Masonry. This is hard for people to wrap this is hard for people to kind of get hands on. But to make a long story short, Masonry doesn't behold any one particular religious doctrine. It's up to the individual Mason whatever the individual Mason chooses for their religion, that's kosher. The only requirement is, and this is so hard for people to understand, is Masonry is deism. You have, in order to join a Masonic Blue Lodge, you have to believe in a supreme being, God. In Masonry, this character is called the great architect of the universe, or the grand geometrician, generally speaking. You have to believe in a God character. How you get to this God character is up to the Mason. So if you believe that praying at night to this God character, or God is your path, that's fine. If you believe Christianity is the way, go for it. If you believe Buddhism is the way, fine. Islam, Judaism, no problem. You can't be an atheist and you can't be an agnostic. That's what you can't be. So it's really up for the individual Mason. And of course, if the Mason's a Christian, then they're probably going to have a belief in some sort of heaven and some sort of hell. It's really sort of up to the individual Mason. That kind of question could only be answered by the individual Mason. Masonry as a body doesn't really preach any sort of religious doctrine other than belief in a supreme being, but how you get there is up to you.
Right. Well, that makes sense. It's almost like their belief systems transcend to a higher level of spirituality.
Yeah, I mean, it causes. But I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I'd say most people don't have a problem with it. Where this could get Masonry into trouble, to be completely honest, is, and it's just your blend. Masonry has no problem with Judaism, or Judaism has no problem with Masonry. Islam, Buddhism, Deism, Hinduism, no problem. The only religion that this can kind of butt heads with is Christianity. And it's really your interpretation of Christianity. I mean, if you're just sort of like a laid-back Christian, I think Jesus was a righteous dude, you're not going to have a problem with this. But if your reading of the Bible is much more literal and much more conservative, technically, since you're in a Masonic lodge and they're not invoking Jesus, they're invoking the grand geometrician, that technically is somewhat within the Christian church is a no-no. But again, it's your blend of Christianity. If you're kind of non-denominational and laid back about it, probably won't have a problem with it. But if you're more of a literalist, technically you may have somewhat of an issue with it. But that's really the only religion that would probably have somewhat of an issue with Masonry in general.
That's really interesting. So, yeah, the belief systems, I guess, would lay the foundation. So I suspect that would control the reality to some degree. But let me ask you something. Why is number 13 such a taboo for a lot of people? That's always been a good number for me. But a lot of people are really, really freaked out and get nervous about number 13. What's your take on that?
Yeah, the number 13 is really not an unlucky number. I mean, we have this Royal Arch of Enoch ceremonial, which is the 13th. We have an astrological allegory with the 12 houses of the zodiac ruled by the sun. We have 13 original colonies. And of course, this is symbolized all over the place on the dollar bill, which is an esoteric explanation. And of course, my take on it is that the number 13 is also an esoteric reference to this Royal Arch of Enoch ceremonial. My understanding of the number 13 starting to get a bad rap goes back to the Knights Templar, who were arrested on Friday the 13th. I want to say 1307, that is where the whole the idea of Friday the 13th being a bad luck, and I think the number 13 just carried over with 13 being an unlucky number. But in reality, it probably isn't. It has a lot of arcane meaning behind it, and but as far as it being a bad luck omen, you could take that back to Friday the 13th and the arrest of the Knights Templar.
Right, and then once again, the symbolism, not in your book per se, but movies like Friday the 13th, and of course putting that taboo on the number 13, and insofar as horror and anything that's traumatic, so they associate that with maybe something fear-based. A lot of people do. I wonder if that's part of a programming that's really a deterrent from those who are actually understanding that 13 is a good number.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because I actually mentioned that in the cinema book. I said, I had in the movie book in Cinema Symbolism, I have a default chapter on horror movies, and I got into some of the symbolism with Halloween. There's some funny stuff going on in the John Carpenter movie Halloween, and I got into the slasher flicks, and I said, the whole Friday the 13th thing, with Jason Voorhees and the hockey mask, and the whole negative connotation with Friday the 13th being this fearful, dreadful holiday, goes back to the Knights Templar. and their arrest in 1307, and Hollywood just turned it into a slasher movie. It's funny how Hollywood can take that date and basically make a slasher movie out of it. They did it with Halloween, although I think with Halloween it works a lot better than it does with the Friday the 13th stuff.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's still kind of an entrainment program to some degree, I would suspect, for those who have maybe weaker minds. But let's get into a little bit insofar as what you've broken down for some of the films that you discuss in your books. I'd like to cover some of the. Let's start with the more esoteric films that you've touched on. I mean, what did you find that really has a theme of mysticism and initiation?
Oh, absolutely. When you talk to me about initiation and receiving gnosis and things like that, I mean, the one movie that I think I wrote down pretty well in the cinema book, the one that comes to mind right off the bat is The Wizard of Oz. The movie, I want to say, came out in 1939. It is based on a book written by a man named L. Frank Baum. And I'll just jump into this real quick, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure.
Because this is important for the listeners to know. With The Wizard of Oz, you actually have three levels. I'll get to the mystery, initiation in a moment, but just let me give some background on this because it's important. With The Wizard of Oz, you really have three levels of symbolism going on. You have just a profane story. This is about a farm girl who gets whisked away to a magical land, has an adventure, goes home. Have a nice life, see you later. This would be what you'd call your profane explanation. Then you have another level of symbolism going on with The Wizard of Oz, which is the political allegory. The Wizard of Oz symbolizes the political, socio-economic life of the United States of America from around 1895 to around 1905. And there's a ton going on, and I can get into that in a minute. But then you have also this much deeper level, which I call sort of initiation into the mysteries, Gnostic awakening, Gnostic essentio, going on inside The Wizard of Oz. And the reason we know that's in there is the man who wrote The Wizard of Oz, L. Frank Baum, was actually, believe it or not, a member of Madame Blavatsky's Theosophy movement, which, for a lack of a better term, was 19th century neo-Gnosticism. So you have these three levels going on. I mean, you want me to go into this a little more? Or,
sure. Yeah. No. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Well, no. I'll just continue on then. With The Wizard of Oz, I mean, I'll just go to the political allegory first. You have this whole idea of I'll get to the mysteries in a minute, but you have this whole idea of the little girl, Dorothy Gale, the farm being taken away by a tornado. This is foreclosure. In 1895, there was a huge depression where farmers lost a lot of their land, they lost their farms. So you have the tornado representing foreclosure. She goes to a magical land. The Wizard of Oz is William McKinley, who was the president at the time. He lives in Emerald City. Why is that? Because he wanted to use the gold standard to create paperback money. This is why the yellow brick road, where the gold standard leads to Emerald City. Gold leads to the creation or backing of paper money. And then you have this whole idea of the scarecrow being the American farmer. You have the Tin Man being the laborer. If you pay attention to this, the Tin Man, when they meet them, is immobile. He can't move. This again represents this depression of 1895-96, where laborers were laid off all over the place. They finally got put back to work by going to work for the oil companies. This is why Tin Man needs to be oiled up to get him moving again or get him back to work. And then you got the two little dancing troupes. This is a favorite of mine. The Lullaby League. This is the sleeping yet awakening women's suffrage movement. These are the women little dancers, and it's lullaby because they're sleeping but they're coming awake. And again, this is the women's suffrage movement that was gaining momentum at this time. And you got the Lullaby League, the Lollipop Guild, which is the male group. This is unionized labor. And this started at this exact same time under McKinley. And then you have the Cowardly Lion is Eugene Debs, the socialist candidate, or Williams Jennings Bryant, who was the Democratic candidate, who were all bark, no bite, no threat, hence, a cowardly lion, posed no threat to McKinley. So we have this political allegory going on. But then if you go even deeper, you find this sort of initiation into this sort of Gnostic awakening, initiation into the mysteries going on with The Wizard of Oz, where you have the farm girl Dorothy going up the ladder of Minerva and Mithras. to receive gnosis. This is she goes up the winding staircase of Freemasonry to the middle chamber. This is the tornado, to receive gnosis, to receive divine epiphany in this magical land. Madame Blavatsky said in order to be initiated into gnosis, you have to have intelligence, fortitude, and courage. This is why she is joined by people, 3 helpers looking for a brain, a heart, and courage. She walks on the golden path of religion. And this is what Madame Blavatsky often warned against, that the golden path of religion, i.e. Christianity or Judaism or Islam, leads to what the Gnostics called the demiurge, which is a false messiah. And this is what we see. We get to the Wizard of Oz. He's an ogre. It's an illusion. He's not real, but he instills fear. He has to scare people into worship. And of course, he's revealed to be a fraud. And the symbolism was that, this is what the Gnostics taught, that organized religion was a fraud. And this is one of the reasons why the demiurge, once he's revealed, takes Dorothy back to Kansas in a hot air balloon, because religion is hot air. So you have this, and then finally she has the Gnostic epiphany. For her, the gnosis that she receives is that there's no place like home. And then, she goes home, she's awakened, she's smarter, she's better off. But the farmhands, these are the profane masses who don't understand her Gnostic epiphany, her conscious essentio. And you'll find this actually in the movie, and it's in the book as well. Another example of this is in the book and the movie, the witches who use the white Kabbalistic magic, they're of the north and south, symbolizing ascension up the ladder. You receive gnosis by moving up and down the ladder of Minerva or Mithras, so the higher up the ladder you go, the more elevated, the more conscious you are. The women who oppose her, the wicked witch of the west and east, that's just right. The good witches are the north and south moving, symbolizing vertical movement. The negative witches, the black magicians, the women who use the black magic, are the east and west, symbolizing stasis, stagnation, because you can't receive gnosis by moving left and right. You're just on the horizontal plane. And even if you watch the movie, pay attention to Glinda's wand. She has the pentagram on the top with the 1 point up and the 2 points down, which is white magic. So with the Wizard of Oz, you have this real deep sense of initiation into the Gnostic mysteries, initiation into the ancient mysteries. It's a whole chapter in the cinema book. It's probably one of my favorite chapters, and it's probably one of the chapters I get, believe it or not, asked about the most. And it's in Cinema Symbolism. Check it out.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I love the way you've broken this down. I don't think anybody could have done it as good as you have. It's fascinating to listen to you talk about this, because none of that comes to mind when you watch the film. The only thing that does come to mind when I look at it is, yes, we have the power to change reality, and in the end, I guess that was the message, that it's all, we were able to manifest and change any reality. But when you break down every single symbol and what you've seen and how you can decode it, I find that so fascinating. That's wonderful.
Well, I think, I did this, it was really, like I said, the Royal Arch of Enoch book was 20 years of research. And what I did, Solaris, was I turned this on Hollywood. And I really, what I want the listeners to understand, or just know, is just, I applied this knowledge to movies that I knew, that I found this material in. This wasn't just something willy-nilly, or I was just pulling something out, or, okay, there's that. I had to be 100% convinced that this material was going on inside a movie. When in doubt, throw it out was my mantra. So, knowing that Baum, you'll find this with these authors who write these books that get made into movies. A lot of time the authors are very involved with occult circles. Baum was involved with Blavatsky's Theosophy movement. The same story, the story that I just told you, is Alice in Wonderland. It's the same thing, only Alice goes down the rabbit hole instead of going up the ladder, and she goes to the magical land and has the same thing. She receives gnosis, and Lewis Carroll, the guy who wrote that, was involved in a lot of mystical organizations. Another one of my all-time favorites is Ian Fleming, the British agent, the guy who worked in counterintelligence during the war, who wrote the James Bond stories, was surrounded by Aleister Crowley, of all things. And you will find a very occult, esoteric, hermetic themes found in the James Bond stories. That's another chapter. So I really, and let me just say this also. When I was breaking down these movies, I mean, it took me more than one viewing to do this. I mean, even there are some movies that I wrote them and I put them in the cinema book, and then after the book came out, I rewatched the movie and I found something else out. So I have to save that for cinema symbolism too. So it's almost like a never-ending study. But I mean, I just really pay attention to the movie, find out the context, break it down, and then just really start paying attention. And I mean, I have to sit there with, my Blu-ray player. I've got to have my pause button ready and jumping backwards and forwards and pausing and making notes. It's a lot of work, but it's fun and I enjoy doing it.
Right, and you're good at it too. So have you had any feedback insofar as some of the producers in Hollywood giving you any feedback as far as what you've broken down?
No. I have not heard from anyone in Hollywood. I was on the only thing I can tell you that kind of comes close to that was I was on another radio show a couple months ago, and a caller called in who worked in Hollywood, and he kind of validated what I said. He said when a lot of times when these people, writers for movies or screenwriters or screenplay writers or writers, they will turn to archetypes, these sort of, iconic figures a lot of times to incorporate or place in a film because they know it draws heavily on the unconscious mind of the viewer. And he admitted that to me. He said, that's standard practice in Hollywood is the use of the archetypes. And this is something I delve into in the book. I'd say that's probably the closest I've come to on actual Hollywood feedback. And it's important that I got into this whole thing with Carl Jung and the collective unconscious because, it's really a theorem that explains, I believe this stuff is intentionally placed. But it does explain that if a producer says, "Oh, I didn't intend any of this," I don't know what this guy's seeing. The collective unconscious provides an outlet for that, and that is that the material appeared whether beyond your intent because you're dealing with a higher consciousness, and it comes in, irregardless of your intent.
Absolutely.
That's really sort of what Jung was talking about.
I agree with that so much. Yeah, it's like channeling or running energy for something that you really don't even know what you're doing half the time. A lot of people do that all the time. Writers do it all the time.
Yeah.
They start drawing in the energy and running energy for it. Yeah. Well, it seems like life is written in code to some degree, and it's just about cracking these codes and watching it all go and show itself and reveal. It's really fascinating. Now, you touched on the Da Vinci Code, right? Or no?
Oh, the Da Vinci Code is, the Da Vinci Code is one of the movies that I took on in the National Treasure movie. Da Vinci Code was something I touched on in Royal Arch. Royal Arch of Enoch was my first book. That was the 20 years of research. That's the Masonic book. What happened with that was when I was doing Royal Arch, I wanted to bring this book up to the 21st century, and I figured I just delved into this the ancient mysteries, Masonic history, the United States, the architecture. What would be a good way to end the Royal Arch of Enoch book that brought it up to speed? And I thought, okay, let me start doing some of these Masonic themes that I'm finding in films. And National Treasure I talked about the Ninth Gate with Johnny Depp, which has some Masonic themes, secret society themes, Kabbalistic themes. But one of the movies I turned to or took on in the Royal Arch of Enoch was the Da Vinci Code. And the Da Vinci Code is a fascinating movie. This is a movie. This is something I took on in Royal Arch. There is some very well concealed Masonic symbolism going on in that movie regarding the number 13. And again, this turns back to this Royal Arch of Enoch ritual, which is the 13th in the Scottish Rite. And just real quick, if the listeners aren't aware of this ritual, this ceremonial, it's probably one of the most important ones in Freemasonry, certainly one of the most important ones in the high degree bodies. It has to do with the recovery of wisdom and the restoration of knowledge is what this ritual and ceremonial is all about. In the Da Vinci Code, it's fascinating because you will find this number 13 pop up on screen whenever the protagonist or the antagonist or the female lead needs wisdom or needs knowledge or wisdom needs to be given. I know at one point when they're going down the elevator, the clue that leads to the keystone, which, my God, a keystone, I mean, if that's not a Royal Arch symbol, I don't know what is. A keystone is what creates an archway, if your listeners aren't aware. You can't have an arch without a keystone. That's the stone that holds it together. and they're going down, and the clues in on the Mona Lisa, if you pay attention, the Mona Lisa is kept in Hall 13. When the keystone is in the back of the van and they're leaving, you'll see a flash to the guy's watch real quick, and the time is 1:12 a.m. 1 plus 12 is 13. And you will find this number 13 turning up all throughout the Da Vinci Code. The first time I watched it and paid attention to it, I couldn't believe it. And it was happening so much in that movie. That was one of the, sort of aha moments that really started me paying more attention to these movies, and that in the National Treasure movie, which is really the Royal Arch ceremonial from start to finish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great movie. That's that's really interesting how you correlate all that data. And of course the 13 once again. And what about 1111? What's your take on that whole thing where people see the 1111 often on?
No, I'd have to research that. I'm not familiar with that one, but I know that 11, that I think it's 111. This ties into some of the dimensions of this is something I'm taking on in. It's funny you mention that, because this is something I'm taking on in Freemasonry and the Path to Babylon. I'm researching it now. There is a 1-1-1 ratio in the pyramids. And you will find this turning up in some architecture. You'll find it actually, believe it or not, in St. Paul's Cathedral in London, where this is by Christopher Wren, who was a Freemason. You have the Apollonian dome, the sun worship, the Chamber of the Sun at St. Paul's, but the floor to the ceiling is 1-1-1 also. And you will find this 1-1-1 turning up in a lot of architecture and a lot of buildings of importance. And there is a 1-1-1 ratio with the Great Pyramids of Giza, but I don't want to go into it any more than that.
Okay.
It's something I'm investigating right now, and I know it's going on, but it's still in its investigative stages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Well, it's also the Trinity number. The 3 would be Trinity in numerology to some degree, with 1 triple ones. But I know a lot of people have contacted me about the clocks, and they always look at the clock and it says 1111, and I get quite a few people saying that. So just curious about it. Of course, that's a 4 in numerology if you really want to add it all up. So kind of interesting right there. But yeah, so have you done any looking? I know everybody's obsessed with The Matrix, the movie The Matrix, and they say there are a lot of codes, and I'm sure you've cracked that one, right?
Oh yeah, the 3 Matrix movies is a whole chapter in cinema symbolism. We are really dealing with a lot. I mean, this is one. If you have any doubt that the symbolism isn't going on in a movie, watch the Matrix movies. For Gnosticism proper, an initiation into Gnosticism and Gnostic reawakening, I would say the first Matrix movie is really, if you want to see a Gnostic movie, your Gnostic primer movie, that's it, is the first Matrix movie we have. My goodness gracious. I mean, we have the false reality, the illusion, the created by the demiurge, the architect who turns up in part 2. We have Neo, who's going to be the Gnostic savior and is going to bring mankind out of their stasis and is going to awaken them to truth. We have him meeting with the Hermes Trismegistus wizard character, Morpheus. Very interesting name to give to this guy. This is dualistic. This ties into Gnosticism as well. Morpheus in mythology is the god of sleep and dreams, yet it's Morpheus who's going to pull Neo out of the sleep and out of the phony reality and awaken him to the real world. I mean, we have, the whole thing with Neo going into the hotel room, going up the staircase to receive wisdom. You have the black and white checkered floor symbolizing the Masonic Lodge. Then he goes through the looking glass, which is Alice in Wonderland again, going to the real world. We have this whole play on the red pill and the blue pill, and this comes out of a movie called Saturn III. It was a movie that came out in the early 80s, where if you wanted to stay asleep and you wanted to stay into a state of subconsciousness, you took a pill called the Blue Dreamer, and that put you to sleep. You actually find this carried forward in a movie called The Fifth Element, which came out 2 years before The Matrix, where when Dallas Corbin, who is Bruce Willis, travels into outer space with the Fifth Element, with Lilu, they're put to sleep by stewardesses in the blue outfits. That's their sole purpose, is to knock you out. So the blue pill, of course, in the Matrix puts you out. And then Neo wakes up. He's lifted cruciform like Jesus to the light. And then you have, the whole thing with the Gnostic demiurge, which is the architect. He turns up in part 2. You have this whole idea. This comes straight out of the world of Valentinian Gnosticism, of the sacred band who have shrugged off the false illusion to live in poverty, but they're smart, they're aware of what's going on. This is the Gnosticism of a philosopher named Valentinius. And then you have also the Gnosticism of another Gnostic philosopher known as Mani, which taught good versus evil, light versus dark. And of course, you have this going on in the Matrix with this sacred band fighting these evil machines who want to keep mankind subjugated and in a state of stasis. When Neo, as the Christ-like, Gnostic savior, goes on board the bridge of the Nebuchadnezzar, you'll see the nameplate flash real quick. It says Mark 3:11. That's a reference to the biblical verse Mark 3:11, which says, "Thou art the Son of Man, and all dark demons bow down to you." So this is sort of announcing Neo as the Christ savior of mankind. And of course, the demiurge, the creator of the false illusion, the creator of the false reality. In Gnosticism has a group of fallen angels or angels that run around doing his bidding. These are called archons. These are the agents in the movie. So then again, we have Neo as the Christ-like Gnostic savior. What happens with him? Well, he gets killed. He gets resurrected with the help of Trinity of all things. So we have our sacred feminine here. And then what happens to Neo at the end? He ascends into heavens like Jesus. This is what the Gnostics would call the pleroma, this divine state of consciousness. He's awakened, and now can not only is he awakened, but can manipulate the false reality. So, if you want to see a Gnostic movie and a Gnostic primer, watch the first Matrix movies. The other Matrix movies have this too, but really, for the idea of Gnostic awakening and a Gnostic savior, it's the first Matrix movie. It's a whole study. I'm literally plowing through this as fast as I can, Solaris. I'm touching, this is the tip of the iceberg with this. I could go on for the Matrix for hours. Ton of Gnosticism in that movie.
Right, and it's well said. I must say you're very impressive with your information. It blows me away. I love listening to you. What's interesting about that movie, The Matrix, it touches on transhumanism as well, the artificial intelligence interface with man. I don't know if you saw that as well, that the transhumanism.
Sure. Yeah, you have the whole transhumanism thing going on with that. You have the Gnostic demiurge who's the architect, but then you have this you have sort of the god behind the architect, which is Deus Ex Machina, which is the giant face that appears at the end, who is sort of the god of the machines. And of course, you see the giant face. You can't help but think of the Wizard of Oz again, sort of the false god. The machine god, which isn't the real god, but it's the false god. And again, this sort of conjures the floating face, the evil face of the Wizard of Oz. And then you have, the whole idea of, the mankind being plugged into the machine, but it's the false reality. And it's just, you have the whole idea of, if you pay attention to this, another one of the symbols that's going on in that movie, you'll see it all over the place. It means different things at different times, but one of the numbers that surrounds Neo is the number 101, which is binary for the number 6. This is because Neo is the 6th iteration of the one. There were 5 more before him. But you will actually find this number also on the floor of the Merovingian in part 2. And he's the keeper of all the fears and anxieties of mankind. Remember, he's the guy who keeps the rogue programs that are the werewolves, the vampires, the ghosts. This is all the anxieties of mankind. The idea of this comes from the world of George Orwell, which in the Ministry of Love, where men are tortured and women are tortured with their fears and anxieties, is Room 101. So you'll have that whole play going on with that whole symbology going on with that. So yeah, just the Matrix, a ton of material going on. I break down all 3 movies in cinema symbolism. I do it much more in depth than I'm going because I'm plowing over this material a mile a minute, but loads going on in the Matrix movies.
Right, and I applaud you once again. You're incredible. And if people want to purchase your books, the best way to do this is through Amazon.com, right?
Yeah, you can buy. We have the paperbacks are on Amazon of both books. They're on Amazon Kindle. You can go to my website, which is robertwsullivaniv.com. My name is Robert W. Sullivan IV, so you go to robertwsullivaniv.com. There's links there to buy the books. They're through my publisher as well. But it's in all the ebook form, Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble Nook. It's in the Apple iBookstore, and you can get the paperbacks as well. You're going to pay more for them. The Kindles are very affordable at $9.99. And yeah, it's on Amazon.com. You can go get it and start reading it right now.
Excellent. So was that $9.99 on purpose?
No, it's actually no. Believe it or not, this may sound silly, but if you actually price I don't know the exact rule with this, but believe it or not, if you actually take an ebook and you price it over $10, you get less of a royalty from it. I don't know why that is. So any potential authors out there, if you're listening to me, make sure your ebooks are no higher than $9.99. You want them to be $9.99 or lower. Do not make them $10 or more. Believe it or not, you actually get less of a royalty. I don't know why that is. I guess they want to keep it affordable. But if you're an author out there and you're listening to me, make sure you. I say that just real quick. Just as a piece of advice. If you're an author or aspiring to be one, make sure your publisher or whatever gets it in ebook format. That's a trend of the future, and you want to price it at $9.99.
Good information right there. Yeah, that's excellent. So what is your impression, coming from the Mason's perspective? What is your impression of transhumanism and the agenda of man integrated in with machine? Do you think that's the fate of where we're heading, even on a metaphysical level?
Well, I like to think not. I don't think really, from a Masonic standpoint, I think it's more of a subjective question. To me, I don't know if I'm going to live to see it. Even right now, we're just at the cutting edge of like mechanical limbs and stuff like that. I mean, if it helps a person, if a person loses their hand or something and it helps them, and you can graft them with a mechanical hand, I mean, it helps them. I'm all in favor of it. But it is weird to think of a world where probably one day men and machine, and women and machine will be living side by side. I don't know if I'm going to live to see it, but you kind of wonder that it's probably coming. I mean, it probably is, and I don't know what it's going to look like, but I kind of it's interesting, and I'm sure. Yeah, it may not be 20 or 30 years away, but I mean, you think, my God, in 400 years, you got to figure that's probably going to be commonplace.
Right. I suspect it's going to be within the next 10 years. Actually, like the next 5 is my impression anyway. But yeah, I see it coming down the pike pretty quick. That's why I was asking, because I do think there's something going on with where the soul and the spirit would dwell through consciousness while interfaced with the artificial intelligence design work, and I've touched on that before. So I find it interesting for those of us who are on the path of mystery school teachings or higher mysticism and consciousness. When we get interfaced with this technology, to what degree does the spirit suffer, the soul suffer? To what degree do we get interfered with? I could go on and on about it, but it's quite interesting nonetheless. And I think go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think you're. When you were touching on the Matrix,
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, when you were touching on the Matrix, it kind of dovetails into some of that information.
Well, what's funny is the movie that comes to mind when you're talking to me about this, and it's played the exact opposite, is Blade Runner.
Right.
Where the replicants, the Nexus Sixes, who are the creations of man, are 10 times more philosophical and in tune and spiritual than the humans, who are just dumb idiots.
Right.
It's the robots who are the spiritual beings. Roy Batty, who's running around, quoting William Blake, things like that. It's the robots who are the spiritual beings, and the human creators are the dumbed down, people who don't get it. So you have that dichotomy as well. I mean, you even find that there's some real deep symbolism going on in Blade Runner. I mean, that's a whole another study in itself.
Right.
I take on in the book, where Batty, is Christ at the end, with the stigmata, the nail in his hand, and when he expires, he releases the holy dove, symbolizing that he had a spirit and that ascends into the heavens. It's a whole fascinating topic that goes into the transhumanistic idea, but where the robot is actually the golem, the Kabbalah. That's what he is. He's a Kabbalistic golem. It's like Frankenstein's monster. Is more philosophical than the creator that made him.
That is so true. That's a good perspective to have, and that's a good way to interpolate the information, and that's one of my favorite movies, too. Of course, we've touched on Philip K. Dick before in the past, and he was spot on.
Yeah,
I mean, he was so incredible with his writing and his information. It's phenomenal, his books, and I'm sure you're familiar with most of his writings. But
yeah, let me just point out to the listeners. I mean, you're absolutely right, Solaris. The Philip K. Dick was sort of this Gnostic, philosopher, and he wrote a novella called "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?" And you're absolutely right. That is the sort of template that Blade Runner was based upon, and it's a great movie. And that movie has loads of material in it. I mean, we could do a whole show on that one by itself.
Right. Yeah, I'd like to touch back on that at some point in the continuum because that is one of my favorite films, and yeah, it does dovetail into a lot of technology. But I do like the point you make about spiritually evolved, or shall we say, philosophically evolved machines. I think that's significant because who's to say the creator off world doesn't have a set of machine technology to some degree, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even if you look at the earliest one of these stories is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I mean, in the movie with Boris Karloff, he's just sort of this giant aping Hulk. But in the book, and the one movie that you really will see it is the one with Robert De Niro, where the monster finally, it's the same thing. The monster is more philosophical and has more questions for the human, and the human doesn't know how to answer them. And is much more, wants to know about his purpose in life and his spirit than the humans are aware of. So you'll even find, and it's not really in the Boris Karloff one, where they just kind of turned him into a hulking, monster. Mm-hmm. But in the book, and in the one with Robert De Niro, the monster is like Roy Batty, is asking the creator, where's my soul? I'm put together by all these parts. Does each part have a part of a soul in it? Am I one part? Am I multi-souls? What am I? And it's the same thing with Roy Batty in Blade Runner. He questions, his whole existence. I wasn't made from heaven. I was made by machine, man-made. But did man imbue me with a soul? Fascinating, stories, and just we could talk about it forever.
Right, and you're so evolved. I loved speaking to you about this topic because you have so many different. The way you perceive data and the way you bring it in from higher consciousness is fascinating. I so respect you for that. And I think we should be taking a break right here. If everybody would stay tuned, we're going to take a break for about 5 to 7 minutes. I believe Keith's going to play Signals from Malibu, and that's from Merle Funkhauser. So you can enjoy the music while we take a quick break here at the Dark Matter Digital Network. And